it feels a little bit more accessible for people than the big D word. So I'm going to walk you through this. A few disclaimers. I am not a medical professional. I'm an MSW with a certificate in gerontology. So in no way should this be construed as medical or legal advice. We are an association of county governments. So I always like to inform people that we are publicly funded. So that does kind of limit some of the things that I can say in the sense that I can't give any specific recommendations or referrals for private businesses. But if you like what we do, it's your tax dollars at work. So, so what is mild cognitive impairment? So most simply, it's a condition in which a person has more memory and thinking problems than other people their age. So there's this really common misconception, I'm sure you've all heard this as well, that as we get older, we all slow down, our brains don't think as well. Memory loss is kind of normal as we get older, and that's just not true. So while some memory loss is normal, the memory loss that happens in mild cognitive impairment is not the same as normal healthy aging. So healthy aging, you might forget someone's name on occasion, maybe misplace your keys, the remote, the phone, whatever. I think we've all probably done that. You might miss an appointment now and then, but then you remember it later on. Or you might find that it's harder for you to get to a certain word or a certain answer. So if you're watching Jeopardy or playing trivia, it's like, oh, I know the answer to that question. It just doesn't come to me as fast as it did when I was 20. Possible mild cognitive impairment. This is where it tips into the side that we think, okay, this is abnormal. And that's things like forgetting names often. If you're routinely losing keys to the point where it's starting to impact your daily living, impacting your quality of life because you're concerned about the things that you're forgetting. You're frequently missing appointments. If you start substituting or using the wrong word, language change that's more than just forgetting a word every now and then. That kind of tips into that mild cognitive impairment category. So how common is MCI? It's more common than people think. About 15 to 20% of people over the age of 65 meet the criteria for mild cognitive impairment. And as we age, our risk goes up for mild cognitive impairment. About 1 in 4 people over the age of 80 present with mild cognitive impairment. So a lot of people think that mild cognitive impairment is a precursor to dementia. And does it cause dementia? Will it progress to dementia? Well, it's complicated. So overall, people living with MCI do have a higher risk of developing dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, dementia with Lewy bodies, vascular dementia, primary progressive aphasia, Parkinson's. However, in some cases, people will remain stable or even improve. So somebody could live with a mild cognitive impairment until the end of their life. Everybody is really different. So the general pathway that we see is, these preclinical stages where a person might be worried and kind of wondering for themselves, but nobody else has really picked up on it. And they might, not have any symptoms that would show up on something like a cognitive screening, a MOCA or a SLUMS or something like that. Uh, and then there's this fine line where there becomes a detectable change. So the MOCA is the memory screening that we use. It's the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. That one is particularly sensitive to mild cognitive impairment. So this is when one or more domains are impaired. So it can't just be one thing. That's an important distinction too. So if somebody's just having impacts in their language, but every other part of their cognitive functioning seems to be intact, that wouldn't give them a diagnosis of a mild cognitive impairment. It would just be a language impairment. So if you have more than one, though, that's when it becomes that mild cognitive impairment, Stan. And as pathology increases in the brain, so whatever disease might be causing that impairment, whether that's Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal degeneration, what we typically see the progression is as the pathology increases, so as more of those plaques and tangles, for example, or whatever is happening organically in the brain changes, that person's ability to complete their activities of daily living independently become impaired as well. So that's kind of the typical progression, but any of these stages can last for however long. So somebody could be in kind of that early stage dementia for until the end of their lives. Some people it progresses very rapidly, some people it progresses slowly. So truly every single person is different. So there's some subsets of mild cognitive impairment. So amnestic is when memory is impaired. This is probably what most people think of when they think of mild cognitive impairment, is that forgetfulness or confusion. That's most commonly associated with MCIs that do progress to Alzheimer's disease. Non-amnestic is when memory is intact, but one or more other areas of thinking are impaired. So somebody might have a hard time with their executive functioning. They might have a hard time making good decisions, or they may have sleep issues, things like that. So in a single domain mild cognitive impairment, that's like what I was talking about earlier with like language. So just one area of thinking is impaired. Multiple domain means multiple areas of thinking are impaired. So this is really clinical nitty-gritty, but I feel like you guys can handle it. So testing and diagnosis. So testing can be done by a primary care provider. And actually, I think that's usually where most people start. And I think that's a good place to start. I think a lot of memory challenges or cognitive impairments can be handled by a primary care provider. But sometimes people will have a referral to a specialist, such as a neurologist or a neuropsychologist, geriatric psychiatrist. Those are kind of the range of specialties that would do a testing and give you this diagnosis. So the first step is usually a cognitive screening or a memory test. But ideally, what we like to do is see people have those metabolic panels, rule out anything else that might be causing dementia-like symptoms. So urinalysis, physical exam, do some imaging, see if there's maybe tumor or something happening in the brain or some kind of vascular issue. And as well as screening for mood and behavior disorders, because particularly with depression in older adults, it can be a pseudo dementia. It can really appear like dementia symptoms. So all of these other conditions, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are all things that can cause changes in the way that our brain is working. Medication interactions is a huge one in older adults. We see a lot of polypharmacy where people are on a lot of medications, or they've been taking a certain medication for a long time. But as our bodies age, the way that we metabolize medicine changes too. So even something that somebody's been taking for 20 years, it might start impacting them differently as their body is aging. So I think pharmacists are a really underutilized resource. I think if you can get a pharmacy consult and have somebody who can look at the list of prescriptions and rule out anything that might be causing brain fog, that's a really helpful step for people too. So I think that's an interesting place to pause, because I think what happens sometimes is people think, I think there's something happening with my brain, but you can't cure Alzheimer's, so what are they going to do for me anyway? And as we just saw from the last slide, there's actually a lot of things that could be causing that. So it's important that we rule those out before we jump to the conclusion that there's nothing to be done. But after somebody has ruled out any of those, potentially reversible causes, and they have this diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, the next step is really, what comes next? What do I do? And I think this is an important juncture for people, because you have the ability at this point to be able to plan ahead. What do you want people to know about you? What are your values? What's important to you? How do you want to spend your time? So for people living with any kind of cognitive impairment, whether it's an MCI or dementia, doing things gets harder. And so thinking really critically about, where do I want to spend my precious energy and where do I want to use my brain power? What's really important to me in this phase of my life? And figuring out, who do I want to make decisions for me? Who's going to be able to help me if and when I'm not able to speak for myself? And that really falls under the advanced care planning umbrella. So that can include completing legal documents, so power of attorney for healthcare, electing somebody to be your healthcare agent to really make those decisions for you. And of course, this is a far more comprehensive presentation. We could talk about advanced care planning all day, but these are just some examples. Figuring out if somebody decides they don't want to have any advanced medical interventions anymore. Maybe they had a family member that lived with advanced Alzheimer's disease and they watched them experience that and decide, I don't want to live for a long time with Alzheimer's disease. I would rather, elect to not have really aggressive medical interventions given this diagnosis. And really, it just comes down to those conversations. So, figuring out what are the goals of care, um, talking about when is palliative care appropriate, at what stage might my decision change. So somebody with mild cognitive impairment might say, yeah, I would like CPR, or I would like to be intubated if I need it. Whereas later, if their disease progresses and they do end up having dementia, they might decide, no, if I can't remember who my family members are, I don't want to have CPR. And so you can spell all of that out in advanced care planning documents. Other tools that people find really helpful in the kind of early stages or newly diagnosed of mild cognitive impairment is really simplifying their lives, figuring out what is a big deal, what's super important, and what's not important anymore. And so, if you can come alongside a person and go, okay, what is the real priority here? If you'd like to spend more time with your grandkids, if you'd like to do more art, then why are we so focused and worried on the landscaping on the back 5 acres, whatever it may be that's taking up a lot of space in someone's brain, trying to help them declutter and organize and really building in those habits and routines, because if things do progress, those habits and routines are going to be really helpful for them. And that's something that family and friends can help maintain that as well. And don't be afraid to ask for help. So professionals are here to help. We have a lovely group. It's an early stage empowerment group. We have a few people in there with mild cognitive impairment. We have a few people that have different specific dementias, frontotemporal degeneration. It's a great chance for people to talk about tools that they've found that work for them and really just get out and talk about it. So helping to erase some of that stigma, and recognizing this is a medical condition. And talking to friends, families, neighbors, using technology. If you're somebody that is open to that, sometimes technology can be really helpful. Having things like your Alexa that sets alarms for you, or having a medication reminder set up, things like that. So again, if we can implement those on early, then if things do progress to dementia, that's going to be so helpful down the line because somebody's already started to get in the routine of doing something. Nutrition, of course, we know eating healthier. The best diets that they recommend for brain health are really the MIND diet, which is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, if anyone's familiar with the DASH diet. So again, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So trying to focus more on less processed foods, those green leafy vegetables, nuts, legumes, good healthy antioxidants. Again, a nice rule of thumb that I like to tell people is if you showed the food to your great grandmother, would she recognize it as food? And if the answer is no, then you probably shouldn't eat it. It doesn't belong in your diet as a routine staple, right? So thinking about those good whole foods that we get from the earth and that are minimally processed. But you'll see at the bottom of this food triangle here, it's not just about what we eat, it's the way that we eat it. So in a lot of those Mediterranean cultures, they're having long dinners. It's intergenerational. You'll see whole families together. There's often music and dancing and laughter and conversation. So it's not just about what we put in our body, it's that meal time that's really special. So making more opportunities to be social and be active. So you can really maximize the benefits of eating a brain healthy diet if you're doing it with people that you care about and you're getting that good interaction at the same time. Other things that we want to be mindful of is hearing and vision loss can really impact your brain health. So if you can't hear what's going on or you're not seeing things as well, you're going to miss those input and those cues. And what happens naturally is people have a harder time going out and interacting with people because they can't see or hear what's going on. They start to isolate more. And of course, we know that's not good for our brain health. It can also increase your risk of falls and any sort of injury to the brain is going to put us at a much higher risk of developing any sort of brain pathology.